Hi, everyone. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce our speaker, Manoush Zomorodi. Manoush is a journalist and podcaster covering technology and its impact on society. And she's been examining various topics affecting our daily life and changing behaviors. I got hooked to Manoush's podcast, Note to Self, about a couple of years ago when she started a series of challenges to tackle our digital addiction. We have seen a recent tide against companies who are gradually and almost unnoticeably changing our daily lives. Somehow, our human conversations are turning into shallow signals. But today, we're in for a very human, down-to-earth conversation with Manoush, who will walk us through her own experience and observations in balancing technology. Manoush, thank you for being here.
You guys, Mozilla, I feel like it's like a homecoming, sort of. It's so nice to be here. Whether you know it or not, you have supported some of the projects that I've done. So I'm grateful to you for showing the way when it comes to making tech that walks the walk, and supporting those of us who are trying to get the message out to consumers too. So that's what I'm going to tell you about. So if you didn't get hooked on my podcast 2 years ago, like Maria, I'll fill you in a little bit about how I sort of came to be in this field, despite not being able to code or anything like that. But so hardcore journalist with the BBC, with Reuters television. At first I was in breaking news, so flying all over the world, that sort of thing, covering plane crashes, etc. Then I settled down a little bit in New York and mostly covered business and tech, before, when it was still like just about the stock market numbers, or, whoa, look at this robot that can fly, it looks like a pigeon, things like that. So early aughts, if you will. And when I went to public radio, this was a friend of mine who became the editor-in-chief of the business department. And I went out for lunch with him and I was like, dude, New York's economy is making a huge shift to tech. Why are you not covering this? And he was like, because I don't have any resources, bitch. Why don't you come and cover it? I was like, okay, I will actually. So I started doing this little weekly show that really was looking at how the tech industry was reshaping New York's economy. And this happened to coincide with a moment that podcasting was having where people were suddenly really listening, and the station came to me and was like, we want to get more into this podcasting thing and we think you'd be good at it. Oh, and you're a woman, so that's good too. And I was like, okay, let's do it. But what I realized as I was starting to do more of this tech reporting in a podcast form was two things. One, which was there were plenty of places for people to get their tech news, right? They could go to, Kara Swisher alone could provide all of that for you. But what they were not getting was a place where they could learn or think about or reflect on how technology was changing their lives, the way that they were meeting people and falling in love, the way that they were parenting, the way that they were doing their work, if they even went to an office anymore at all. And podcasting, I think, simultaneously sort of showed that you could have this very intimate medium. You could have conversations there in a place that you really couldn't do anywhere else. So that was a huge wake-up call for me. And really, I started to think of myself less as a journalist, although that's extremely important still, but also more of a guide, a person who could help people navigate these big changes. And now people send me letters, like real letters. Don't they look so beautiful? Like I just love that. It's like people actually send me letters because they are struggling, right? They're struggling with the constant pings. They are struggling literally with their kids and screen time. They are looking for answers. They want to know what to do. And so what I'm going to tell you here today is some of the answers that I have helped them find. And actually, they have helped me as well, because this is a two-way street. Because we've done some sort of unusual solution-oriented experiments. One we did in 2015 was a week-long experiment to help people deal with information overload. I now realize we were a little ahead of the curve because fake news hadn't happened yet. But the goal was to help people discover how to focus and actually extract information for what it is to help them do what they needed to do. And then last year, we did another week of daily challenges. This was called the Privacy Paradox, sponsored by Mozilla, to help people, to help people understand where their personal information actually goes online, what little steps they can indeed take to reclaim some of their digital identity, why they should use the Firefox browser also, things like that. People who are walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And so that was really quite extraordinary. We had 50,000 people sign up to do a week-long boot camp about digital privacy. That to me is like amazing. But today I really want to dive into the first project I did, which was called Bored and Brilliant, the lost, oops, I wanted to go back, sorry. Cool. A project called Bored and Brilliant. And now, oh, that was my next slide. Ta-da, it's a book, yay. And there are a stack of them over there. So the idea for this all started though with a very personal problem that I was facing, which was in 2014. So my job obviously is to, first and foremost, is to come up with creative ideas, unusual ways of telling stories about information that I think is really important for people to know. So I had this moment where I was like, okay, the podcast is doing well. I really want to kick it up a notch. I'm going to sit down and brainstorm because that's what we do, right? And I had this very profound moment that I can only describe as disturbing in that I felt like there was nothing upstairs. And that really terrified me because my livelihood is built on me being like, oh, we could do this and we could do that. And it wasn't writer's block because I've had writer's block before. And that's different. That's just like, the muse, she's not with you today. She's out drinking or whatever. No, this was different. This was like there was sand in my brain. And so I tried to, figure it out. Well, when had I had my best ideas in the past? And it was such a cliche. It was like, oh, when I went on a long car ride and was staring out the window, or when my kids were babies before I had an iPhone, and I was just pushing their stroller for hours and hours. This is my fun fact, which is that my son and the iPhone were born 3 weeks apart in June 2007. But I didn't get an iPhone for another 2 years. I'm not an early adopter. So I realized when I was bored, essentially, that was when I had my big moments, when I was sort of spacing out. And now I realized, what was I doing in all those times? I was looking at my phone all the time, like when I was waiting for coffee, when I was waiting to pick up my kids on the playground. All of those moments, those little tiny cracks in my day were filled with phone time. And so my question was, well, isn't boredom a bad thing? Like we're always told only boring people get bored. But wait, if I'm never bored, could I possibly be missing out on something or anything? I used this slide in my TED Talk, by the way, and Steve Case had a good chuckle in the front row. I thought you'd find that interesting. So I started talking to, I love my job because I get to go find out answers, right? So I went to talk to neuroscientists, cognitive psychologists, and it turns out we're at this amazing moment in time where fMRIs are starting to show what actually happens when your mind begins to wander. It is a thing, mind wandering. And so boredom is sort of, I like to think of it as like the ignition, right? If you ignite it, you go into what's called the default mode in your brain. So this could be when you're just sitting and staring at a wall, or you're doing something that doesn't require your focused action. So like folding laundry, something very repetitive. And in the default mode, our brain gets really busy, and actually scientists even refer to it as the imagination network. It turns out that in the default mode, that is when we have our most creative ideas. We take one disparate thing here, we have another idea here, and we smash them together to make something new. We also do something called, I had never heard of this, autobiographical planning. This is where we look back at our lives, we take note of the highs and the lows, and then we build a personal narrative. This is how I got to now, theory of self. And then we say, well, where am I going to go next? How does this story go? And we figure out our goals and we figure out the steps that we need to take to reach those goals. So incredibly important stuff, particularly I would think for young people. But we can't, of course, tap this brain power if we're constantly tapping our phones. And that's what most of us are indeed doing. So I reached out to my audience and I was like, are you guys feeling like your technology is sort of taking over your brain? And would you be interested in maybe, I don't know, messing around and seeing if we made some changes, what would happen? And I thought like a couple hundred people, because keep in mind, this is 2015. I mean, God, that's not like that's yesterday to me, but it feels like a lifetime ago. And I thought like a couple hundred people would sign up to do this weirdo project with me. But within 48 hours, 20,000 people signed up. Yeah. And people were like, hell yes, I'm struggling. And the top three things that they told me they were concerned about were that they felt that it was messing with their productivity. They feel addicted. Now, addiction, that term is still quite controversial, but leave it there for now. And they were worried that it was affecting their physical health. People like Karin.
Hi, my name is Karin. I am a New Yorker, born and raised, and was desperate for this bored and brilliant challenge. It's perfect. I needed it. I've definitely developed some compulsions for Facebook, Instagram, checking the news, checking email, replying to email right away, texting, hunting for funny emojis. I just need a break from my phone because I'm not sure that these activities really add all that much value to my life, and they certainly take up a lot of my time.
So Karin and over 20,000 other people woke up every morning to a newsletter that said, try this behavior tweak. Try and change how you do your life today in one very tiny, small way. And we also gave them a corresponding podcast that explained the design of the technology, the science behind why we had chosen this particular tweak. And then we were off to the races for this week. And I should also add that because people love data and love to self-quantify, we also partnered with 2 apps where people could not only track how many minutes a day they were on their phone, but check-ins. You know the check-in where you just like, wait, is something new happening? Wait, is everything okay? Wait, did something, that was my issue. It wasn't minutes, it was the checking. So I was checking my phone 130 times a day. And I didn't, if you had asked me, I would have told you, I don't know, maybe 30. And I thought that made me sound a little crazy. So this reflex that has become, I mean, for me, it was like, I noticed it. I started noticing I would go into an elevator and I would check my phone. And then I would come out of the elevator and check my phone. Like anything had happened in the 0.35 seconds that occurred between them. In any case, before challenge week, you gotta love data. We were averaging just over 2 hours a day on our phones. We were checking our phones around 60 times. If that seems low to you, you are correct. But I would like to tell you that I think we had a our audience is very self-aware. And so I think compared to the population at large, we were actually on the relatively low side. And also keep in mind that a 20-year-old doing this project, they were likely checking their phones around 150 times a day versus my mom who like, whoa, if she checks her phone 20 times a day, that's crazy. 74 different standards, right? So that was the average. So every day, we had them do something, right? So day one was put it in your pocket. The idea being take your phone off your body, keep it in your bag, just see what that's like. And for any of you who have had the sensation of thinking that your phone is ringing, but actually it's your stomach growling, that's a real thing. That makes a lot of sense, right? This idea that you're not physically connected to your gadget. This is a screen grab from day 3, where we asked people to take the app that was driving them the craziest. For me, it was 2 Dots. Any 2 Dots players in the house? No? You're the first audience that I've been to where there's not been someone who's like, this. In any case, maybe Toronto, I don't know. So we asked them to take it off their phone, not quit the platform, right? Just take it off your phone for one single day. And here was one guy's experience.
This is Liam in Los Angeles, and I deleted Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, Snapchat, and Vine from my phone in one fell swoop. And it was kind of an embarrassingly emotional experience at first. It felt weirdly lonely to look at that lock screen with no new notifications on it, but I really like deciding for myself when to think about or access my social networks, not giving my phone the power to decide that for me. So thank you.
I know, Liam. I love Liam. He's an actor in Los Angeles, hence all the drama. Such an extremist. I was like, Liam, we only told you to take one. He's like, no, I want an A. So I think people learned a lot, not just about how they relate to their friends and family and the technology, but also they learned a lot about their work habits, which I don't need to tell you are changing profoundly every single day. So day 4 was called Take a Vacation. Write an out of reply response that says, for the next hour, I am actually finishing a report, maybe thinking about the meeting that I went to this morning and processing what happened and figuring out where I'm going to go after that. But the key had to be that they reset the expectations of the people in their team or their coworkers or even, their parents, right? The idea being that I think we have come to confuse responsiveness with productivity. We think that because we're telling people that we're almost at work and I'll be in the meeting in 2 minutes and do you need coffee? And I was thinking about that thing, like that's seen as work, but it's not. It's not the deep work as some of you may be Cal Newport fans. He's been on the podcast. He's a computer science professor at Georgetown, but he's really made his thing talking about deep work and how in our economy moving forward, that is going to be where the change happens and the money happens, the people who can sit down and process and aren't distracted by all the pings. My favorite informatics professor, you all should have your own informatics professor, but mine is at UC Irvine, and Gloria Mark, and she told me that it makes total sense that we feel like we're getting no work done because a decade ago, people shifted their attention between online and offline activities about every 3 minutes. And now we are finding that people are shifting their attention every 45 seconds. So the average person checks email 74 times a day and they switch tasks on their computer 566 times a day. Yeah, insane, right? So I asked Gloria, I was like, is it that we humans have some sort of inherent weakness, that technology has been built very beautifully to exploit? Or if we weren't distracted by this stuff, we would just be distracted by something else. And here's what she told me.
So I think it's a combination. One thing that we found is that there's actually physiological reasons that can explain why people shift their attention so rapidly. So we find that when people are stressed, they tend to shift their attention more rapidly. We also found, strangely enough, the shorter amount of sleep that a person gets, the more likely they are to check Facebook. So we're in this vicious, habitual cycle.
That made total sense to me. For those of you at the end of the day, you're exhausted, you're so tired, maybe you just put the kids to bed. You should just be lying there on the floor, listening to their sweet breaths, appreciating the universe. But no, you're going like this on Instagram because you're tired, right? It's so easy. It's so delicious and sugary in some ways, to your Lustig reference. So one chapter in the book is about actually an experiment at Boston Consulting Group where they were noticing that they were having retention problems in that the consultants were burning out so hard and so fast because they were responding to pings, and being expected to be on all the time. And so what they did was they took their groups and they said one person must take time off in the middle of the week. In fact, you cannot check email. You must be cooking or exercising or spending times with your family, and you will not be penalized. Clients won't know because we will make sure that you are backfilled. And they sort of tracked it over a couple years, and they saw retention increase dramatically. Not only that, but they saw that teams actually started talking to each other because they needed to, instead of having the little like, did you check in? Did you do that? Did you do this? They were doing proper handovers. They were sitting down and talking through some of the issues that they had. So to me, all of this is, it's all fine. We're grown-ups. We're screwed. But what about the kids, right? Like, what about the children? We know that, and I hear this, I just went to visit actually a 8th grade health class with a professor, or not professor, he's a teacher. He's a teacher who has been a big fan of the podcast and who has started to use a lot of our episodes in his class. And it's very clear that like they know that the gadgets, it's not good to look at Snapchat at 2 a.m. And in fact, when I took my kids to a pediatrician check-in the other day, the pediatrician said, do you brush your teeth? Do you wear a seatbelt? Do you turn off screens an hour before bedtime? And I was like, wow, this is mainstream now. All right, the message is getting there. But I think what we need to start, and they know that the internet like can be a horrible place, right? They know that. But I think what we need to start doing is getting into the weeds with them, right? Really, instead of saying like, turn it off, really explaining to them like why Snapchat built streaks. I don't know if you guys like the streaks. Okay, it's not getting naked for those of you over 30. It is sending your friend a selfie. So every day you send each other a selfie, you collect points, you get emoji trophies. Don't break the streak. I mean, you've got kids going for 300, 400 days, and it's become symbolic that if you break the streak, that is the end of your friendship. And you obviously did something terrible to make that person feel awful. So instead of being like, oh my God, streaks are dumb, they're not. They're obviously playing on a very important need that kids have to connect. But let's explain to them why Snapchat built it that way, that their valuation is built on engagement with their users, right? What's a user? What's a valuation? How do you build something that collects points and trophies? I think the kids are way smarter than we were. They totally get it. And if you unpack it, it makes sense. So we had actually with Bored and Brilliant a lot of time. We had a lot of high school classes and college classes do the project together. There was one professor who said to me, he's like, all of these things, my students are very aware of them, but there hasn't been a codified, organized, fun way to test it. And that's what they found with Bored and Brilliant. And I just want to play you a clip from this wonderful teacher that I talked to in Florida.
All right, everyone. So last week we talked about the Bored and Brilliant project. How many of you are going to participate? Yeah, wonderful.
So what did you observe after they did it? Like, what did you see? Was there like, I don't know, twitching?
Not twitching, more eye contact, actually. One of the things that we're in a pretty tech-saturated classroom, so they're always in front of screens of some sort. And I think part of what this project actually also did was try to highlight for them that from the moment they wake up till they fall asleep, there are always screens in front of them, whether it's their mobile screen, a screen in a classroom, a desktop, or a projection screen. And so to actually have them delete an app or to begin to put the phone away from their body was another good one. You saw a lot more of their eyes. They were looking at each other. And even though they sat right next to each other every day, it was a different experience, I think, for them.
That was so eye-opening for me. The idea that we have to teach things that we've never had to teach before. Eye contact, conversation, maybe even boredom. Human things that we have always taken for granted are now things that we actually have to build into curriculum, is my belief. So just to backtrack, Bored and Brilliant, we measured 20,000 participants, 90% cut down on their phone minutes, 70% felt like they had more time to just think. I don't know, the data was interesting, but more to me were these personal stories of people telling me that they came up with a way to talk to their kid about something their family was going through, or the fact that they slept better, or were just happier, or that they hadn't played their guitar in 3 years, and they're so glad that they're doing it now. So fast forward 2 years, book comes out, and I was kind of like, is anyone gonna remember this weirdo project that we did 2 years ago? And guess who got back in touch? Liam. Here's what he said.
I'm currently on an incredible trip to Europe, and I've stayed off Facebook this whole time. Every time I ponder posting a photo from my adventures, I think about how I'd keep checking to see who liked it. And I think about how seeing other people's adventures on Facebook 9 times out of 10 ends up making me feel depressed by comparing my life to my perception of theirs. There's something about sharing my life very sparingly now that makes my experience a little richer and more introspective.
So much drama, so many feels with Liam. He never put the apps back on his phone after that one day. They never went back. And he sort of started doing his own little life hacks, right? Like he didn't quit Facebook, but now when he goes on Facebook, he sits down at his laptop, he does it for 20 minutes, and then he's done. It serves the purpose that it was meant to serve. I'll have to ask Mark Zuckerberg about that. What can I just share? This was crazy. This one woman who did the project had such a profound experience that she renamed her farm, Make Time Farm, and now does Bored and Brilliant one day a month and invites the community. It's in Wisconsin. She decided that it was her job to provide this space for the community, for people to feel that they had a place to come to get bored or bring their sewing machine, or she also puts writing prompts up in the barn. How awesome is that? I know, right? I just want to go live with her. So that was very moving for me. And then when I went on book tour, the idea, like these were the hardcore people, right? But I wanted to see what would happen beyond that. And it was so interesting. Well, first of all, we had a ton of fun on my book tour, as you can see. And yes, I had some toasted moms who'd be showing up at my events. That's totally fine. If I'm the excuse, I love it. And it was so interesting to me. The top 3 sort of issues that came up on my book tour were how parents should be dealing with screen time, employees who are dealing with workspace burnout. That was like, I went to do a talk at Google and I sort of thought they'd be really tough on me. No, all they wanted to talk about was how they could get their employees to stop, or their coworkers to stop pinging them. I was like, you could build something. They looked at me like, what? And then the third one that killed me was young adults who are struggling with depression and anxiety. That's very upsetting. So 2015, like I said, it was kind of fringy, this whole thing that we did. You guys got it. Not a lot of other people did. They saw it as kind of anti-tech, which I definitely don't mean it to be in any way. As you can see, the tech made it possible for me to do this project to begin with. But here we are, it's in 2018, and the world has changed. Every day, people have another reason to question the big tech companies and how we're using it. And, I get that it is hard not to refresh the headlines or react with outrage on Twitter. Just ask our president. But I just grabbed some headlines. You guys know this, the utopian belief that tech is always a force for good is being questioned. But I think now it's being questioned from a consumer perspective, a civic perspective, and also an economic perspective, which is a big shift. The question is, will there be regulation? Will there be design or other responsibilities taken by the big tech companies? I mean, we'll see. And I think now that we've seen the big tech companies have to go down to Capitol Hill and testify in front of Senate Intelligence Committees, that bodes pretty well. On a macro level, we are seeing that democracy is at stake, so big. And I think we know we want our highways, we want our water to be safe, and we want the internet, I think, to also be safe too. It is our infrastructure. But I would also say on the micro level and at a very immediate sort of sense, I think we really need to do something about this mental health component. Sean Parker, you guys know, recently admitted that the platform, Facebook, was built to exploit those human vulnerabilities, like Gloria Mark, my informatics professor, said. And we're living in this age of self-experimentation where I don't think that we can wait for regulation or antitrust measures or activist shareholders to put checks and balances in. We can't. I'm meeting the kids who are struggling right now. And this age of self-experimentation is exciting, but it also needs to be, we can't, what I'm also seeing is that the researchers cannot keep up with what you and I are seeing every single day in our lives. So I'm looking for a name. If you guys could help me with that, I'd be really grateful. What do we call this overlap? I think we have to find a word for it. Because it's so interesting to me to see who's been reaching out to me recently. It's people who are in meditation. I'm going to be on the cover of a lifestyle magazine in April, which is very exciting. So I'm not a tech reporter anymore. This is life, right? And I think that what we're going to be seeing is that you can wear yoga pants and be interested in having a good VPN on your phone. This is who we are. It is normal. It is mainstream. And I think we're going to be talking about these seismic cultural and technological shifts, and people want solutions in the next year. And so my job is to make sure consumers get their voice heard and that they understand it in a way that is accessible and solutions oriented. So I would just say that every morning, what can you do right now on a very personal level? Every morning when you wake up, remember that you wake up with a limited amount of dopamine, the neurotransmitter that makes us seek novelty and excitement. And as Daniel Levitin, the neuroscientist, said to me, he's like, do you want to spend your precious dopamine on seeing if you got more likes on your Instagram post, or do you want to figure out what you're going to do with your life? I was like, that's a pretty stark decision. Thank you for that, Dr. Levitin. So the next time you have an idea, also, I think before you tweet it or share it or ping it on Slack or whatever, like, give it a little time. Like, the good stuff takes time, and that is the one thing that we don't get more of back. I know we all want to go faster, better, but that's when we start to lose the creme de la creme of what we're thinking and doing. I wrote all of these big thought things, but I feel like you guys get it in like a way that most people don't. And I am so gratified that you guys have been supportive of the work that we've been doing. And I think, God, do we have our work cut out for us going ahead. So thank you for having me. Please get bored and do not feel guilty about it. It's super important. You're just activating your default mode. It's something you need to do as a human. So thank you.
Yep. Hello. Yep. Thank you very much, Manoush. This was incredible and
so fun.
so relatable.
Good.
All of these stories. So we'll enter the Q&A session. Manoush is very interested in questions, comments, anything that you've got to share. Diane will help me moderate. And actually, we're going to start with my question.
Oh, okay.
And I will begin with a story, a personal story. We visited China in November, and we were headed to the Great China Wall on a picture-perfect day, which was unusual. And just as we get there, my phone dies.
Panic!
Exactly. And I was imagining how I will capture the whole experience from start to end. It's such a memorable place. And there I was sitting with a dead phone, and I thought of you. And I thought of your book because there is a chapter in the book talking about making memories. And actually, there is a very powerful quote there. We decided to capture a significant portion of our lives with the expectation that we can experience it all over again later on Instagram. So in this day, I didn't have a choice. And actually, what I was left with is experience it by myself. And it was so powerful, really. It was the most memorable experience I had from this trip. But we as humans are not very good at self-regulating and keeping these habits on. So what advice would you give us to sustain this kind of moderation or digital, get off from the digital devices and remind ourselves that we have a life to live?
So first of all, I would say I'm very sorry that your phone died, because let's just be clear, like, it's not all great that your phone died, right? Like, you probably wanted to send a picture to your mom or your special someone, and so that you could, it's about making connection, right? Like, oh my God, I'm at this amazing place and I'm thinking of you. That's very powerful. But here comes the self-regulation part, right? And then ideally, you'd turn it off and put it in your pocket and experience it as you did, which leads us to the other end of the spectrum, which is the mindfulness sort of area. And so what we're asking people now to do is live on this spectrum all the time, where you're totally connected to the world and you're totally present and in yourself. And that is so tiring. Constant, like, is this the right thing to do? Am I doing it the right way? Is it okay? Do I feel okay? Am I okay? Is the world okay? Like, that constant questioning is really hard. So I mean, I just also think of myself as a 13-year-old who, of course, never would have been able to self-regulate like that. No way. So to me, that's where the potential is for the tech companies. Settings that people can actually navigate and personalize for themselves, that aren't difficult to find, that you don't have to go digging in there, that think of the way that you actually are in life using the tools, which would be a great thing. And then also, I think just having the conversation, having it like be okay that you didn't post a million things. Because what I heard from some people was like, well, if I don't post on Facebook all the time, my family thinks I'm dead. And I'm like, okay, so that's a problem. And like parents being angry and like not under like, so they're not having conversations anymore. So being able to say like, mom, you know what? I'm really not digging Facebook right now. What if we set up a call? I mean, bummer they have to set up a call with your mom, but like, Sundays at 10, like we used to do back in the 90s, that's radical to some people, this idea of setting up a conversation. But like, resetting the expectations, and also did you read that, like making it okay to say like, no, I didn't see it or read it, but you seem really excited about it, tell me why, what was so awesome about it, and starting conversations. So cultural norms, I think, have to do a lot with it too.
Yeah, and change is not easy, so it has to be gradual as well. Hopefully that will happen. So we'll open up for more questions. First, we'll start in the room.
Oh, you guys have one of those weird boxes?
We do.
The first time I got that, I was like, what do I do? I don't understand.
So the question I have, thank you, first of all, for coming to see us. The question I have is, I'm not a parent, but I imagine when you are talking to a child who is used to being bored and then going to these places for structure-free experience, how do you help a kid rewire their expectations of what you're suggesting instead, which is actually just letting your mind drift? Because I would think somewhere in the back of here, we still want to measure the impact of that experience, even if we don't set out thinking that way. And that's what
you just described. I don't think kids have that, what you just described, like the idea of being bored and then going off and do things.
Yeah.
The kids that I know, including my own, are highly scheduled, have parents who cannot tolerate any belly aching, because the minute they complain, they give them the iPad. Because we have, for some reason, I think we parents have lost our capacity to just like tune out from our kids, right? Like the minute it really takes all of my willpower to not be like, just look at the iPad, you know what I mean? Or, and all I want to do is make dinner, or I have to answer my own work thing. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think there is a lot of this unstructured time that you're referring to. In certain affluent communities, I see, we got a second house because the kids need outdoor unstructured time. We don't have Wi-Fi. Like, seriously. Like specifically, that is why they're doing it. Or I've had people say, I refer to the bathtub as the default mode area. Like if you have to call it that, that's fine too. Whatever you need to do. But it is a capacity and a muscle. That's what the neuroscientists tell me. If you lose the capacity to sit and be still with your thoughts, like, because they're going to go to some ugly places too. And so I had one kid, a young woman, maybe 14, on the book tour who said, I can't do this. This is very, very scary. I don't want to do this. And I was like, what are you so afraid of? She's like, I need to be like knowing what's going on. I need to be in touch with my friends. And I don't want to think what I'm thinking. I was like, it is scary. Let's just acknowledge it. It's scary. Your mind will go to some dysphoric, ruminative places. I use different language when I talk to her about it. But that's okay. That happened to me and I'm okay. Actually, it helped me. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about like the tough stuff. It's not all going to be great. And I think when you're used to like, seeing pretty pictures all the time, you think like, well, everybody else seems to be doing great, but I'm not. I'm miserable, or I'm anxious, or I'm depressed, and I see these people. One other young woman in her 20s said to me that she was in the Whole Foods parking lot, and she was having like a huge, I don't know what her issue was, but she usually would have distracted herself by looking at Instagram, she said, but she said she turned it off and just sat and cried. And I was like, that's really, I'm so glad you did. And she said she felt better and she worked through some shit. I mean, if that's what people need, I am happy to give them permission, That's so interesting. This is a tech podcast that's making people cry. Oh, like super weird. Did not expect to be here. But happy to provide what seems to be what people need right now, which is thank you for your question.
Great. Diana, are we going to check in the other rooms, see if there are any questions?
We are checking in the other rooms. If you're in a commons, don't be shy. We have some from online that we can take. Yep. So we have yes, one more in the room, then we'll take some from the online.
Whoa.
When you say one more in the room, I just just go. Okay. Hi, I'm Jessica, and the question I have, and it's related to the whole product issue, is what is it about task switching or tab switching when you're online that ameliorates the anxiety that people can't really sit with? So you're saying 500 plus times per day.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm imagining that, first of all, people are noticing that it's a lower amount of anxiety that requires a movement of some sort. Yep. And I'm wondering what specifically getting off task and into some other place does. Is it the dopamine hit, or where is that going?
My personal theory is that it's intellectual avoidance. So let me give you an example based on my own thing, right? So let's say I'm writing a show and I get to this, I'm in the Word document and I'm like, I don't know how to phrase this. Let's see how other people have put it. Oh, that's interesting. What's a synonym for the word anxiety? That's interesting. Like, rather than sitting and like really, writing a draft, rewriting another draft, and then finally writing one that's actually any good, it's easier to just go and see what everybody else is doing or post. Or do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's hard to keep your butt in a chair and do the work. And you don't have to. In most places, you can just click on over to something else and see everything else that's doing. I think it's this, it's like being an athlete, right? Like getting up every morning and going for a run takes discipline. And the first mile is really tough. And then you build your stamina and you get better. And oh my God, you just did 3 miles without stopping. And that's amazing. I think it's the exact same thing, but for cognitive functioning.
Sorry, I'm going to take at least a couple online questions. We can get back to the room. I see folks in the room.
And I'll be here also if you want to hang out.
If you are in the room, we will have a book signing right after this. So Manoush will be available to chat even more. So I am going to take some of these online questions that we got. So, self-regulation, this topic of self-regulation. So Manoush, this is a question for you. What if your job like you're on a book tour and you kind of want to monitor how things are going. How do you manage that? Or even just staying, you touch a bit on staying in touch with family and friends and setting expectations. But again, professionally, what if you need to use it?
Oh my God, the book tour was a disaster for me. I mean, the irony of going around the country talking about this stuff and being told by my publisher to post about it as often as I possibly could was like a mind fuck. But I noticed, like, I think part of this idea of self-regulation is stepping outside of yourself and watching your behavior. And I've heard this from people and I see it in myself. If I start the day checking, posting, it's like a snowball effect, right? It gets bigger and faster and go, go, go. And did somebody respond? And I didn't, blah, 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 right? But if I start the day and say, I'm going to check my email for 15 minutes at 10, and then I'm going to check Twitter, I think twice today, it's easy for some reason. And I think, it's interesting to talk to the neuroscientists who know things like, for example, again, Dr. Daniel Levitin, that your brain can only hold 4 or 5 things at one time. So if you're like, I got to respond to that Instagram post and, oh, I just ordered lunch. Is it coming right now? And I got to get back to that email. Like, that's it. That's all your brain can hold. So setting parameters, again, it's like training, right? Like if you having to decide every time is going to burn through your glucose super fast. So if you can set up your personal, like Liam did, that he checks his Facebook once at night, then he doesn't have to decide. If like at BCG, they decided that there's a structure, there's a schedule about how they do this that eliminates the need to constantly be, wait, am I supposed to be doing now? Is it okay that it's just part of your life. I eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I don't have to constantly be checking, am I hungry? Although that's another discussion. So I think it's starting to set up parameters that are socially acceptable. And when we start to say, it's cultural, right? We sit down for 3 meals. If we start to decide what is culturally acceptable when it comes to social media or how we use our devices or all of those other things, I mean, that's a ways off, I think, but for now, it has to be an individual's sort of decision.
So I'm going to take one more online because, again, if you're in San Francisco.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes,
that was
please.
kind of a mushy answer. And I think the answer really is that is why we saw success with these projects. We gave people the specifics and they knew that when they woke up, 40,000 other people would be trying the same thing with them. There was a comfort to the community aspect to it, and it was handed to them. This is what you're going to do today. Don't think about it. Just try it. And then just check in with yourself to see if it helps you or doesn't help you. Like with the Infomagical project, we checked in with them at the end of the day, measure what you experienced today. So they had to, the self-reflective. Did I feel better today? Did I learn something better today? Yes or no? So the constant checking in. Sorry about that.
No, not at all. So a couple comments. I know that comments are fair game, and you are interested in hearing people's
comments.
responses.
Oh, I'm super greedy. I want to know what you guys think.
Give me the comments. One comment was that you had mentioned looking for a word about the intersection between technology and life things, and they suggested the Wisdom 2.0 conference. It's a conference that looks at some issues like this. So if you're not aware,
Thank you.
something to check out. And then, the other comment, maybe a question, we tend to blame a lot on our tech devices, but I wonder how much of our mental health crisis is also due to the fact that some stuff in our environment is actually bad. Have you given consideration to environmental?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. None of this exists in a vacuum, for sure. For example, I'm really interested in the blockchain being a place where we can maybe save journalism. And that's a big idea, but then I'm like, oh, I just read an article about the environmental impact of running the blockchain. I was like, oh, that's a bummer. So yeah, it's all about chains and ecosystems with all of this. And I think that person makes a very good point that all of these conversations need to be more interdisciplinary. All of them. I think, I see, and starting with our computer science classes at the youngest ages, that yes, it's great to teach kids how to code. All of that matters, but we need to be having the psychological conversation, the design conversation. All of that needs to be built into it because it doesn't exist
alone. And if it does, that's when you start to run into problems because it's extremely complicated and holistic, as you all know.
Okay, we had a question. I think Alex, did you have a question? Yep. So we have another
She's got a great right arm
question
there.
here.
Having grown up in 80s and 90s, I'm wondering, like, what are the biggest differences or contrasts from, like, we were like zombie kids in front of televisions after school and Saturday mornings, and what's the main difference today's technology versus just being glued in front of a television?
Totally. And so I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to the humane tech movement that's sort of been talking. So one of the people, Tristan Harris, has been on the show talking, and he's a youngin, but his point, I think, is then you turned it off, right? Like there was an on-off situation. Whereas what's different now is that the phone is personalized to play into all of your weaknesses. In fact, it gets you to set up your home screen to play into your own personal weaknesses. And it comes with you, and you need it for the good stuff and the other bad stuff. Like Google Maps is awesome, but then oh look, Instagram's right next to it, or it's like just like that, exactly. So I think that is the key difference, and I think us Gen Xers are the worst. Oh, Gen X, we are so screwed. First of all, it's fascinating to me that like it was cool to be a slacker, and how slackerdom is not cool anymore, which is so interesting to me. But also I think the kids are watching us and seeing our inability to self-regulate. Mommy's falls into a hole when she looks at her phone. And I predict, this is a controversial prediction, but I think kids who are like preteens now and young teens have seen their Gen X parents be so poor at self-regulation that there's going to be a backlash. So my 13-year-old neighbor just got a phone, and I was trying to be cool. I was like, oh, were you like on Snapchat all weekend? And she was like, no, only losers are on their phones all weekend. I was like, damn, girl. All right. So that's my prediction, that they have seen us and they're annoyed with us and they do not want to be like their parents, as every child. That's a healthy way to be. I'm also trying something called narrative parenting. It's like, okay, this guy just looked at me like, what the hell is that? So when my mom used to do something or ignored me, she had her address book out, she had the phone out, she had the yellow pages, she had the calendar, right? You knew what she was doing, she was busy, and you could see it. But now when I'm doing that, when I'm running our family's life, as far as my kids know, I could be playing two dots. It all looks the same. So I'm trying to say, you know what? We have a busy Saturday scheduled. Let me check the calendar. You have guitar at 10 o'clock. That means that we have to leave at 9:30. So I'm going to tell your friend that we're not going to be at his house, talking them through all the stuff that I'm doing, not just turning into the zombie and like not and not just having like mommy's vacant stare when she goes into her phone. I'm trying to include them in the process of what is essentially running our lives. And also I think that's important for boys to see what the hard work that their moms do largely to run the family's life. God bless my husband, but still.
So you touched on life pre-children and post-children, and actually in the book you said your life wasn't just pre-children and post-children; it was simultaneously pre-mobile phone and post-mobile phone. And my question is, without glorifying the pre-mobile era,
yes,
because
absolutely.
we can't live without that. What is the single most important thing you would like to reclaim, if you could, from that era?
Can I just say one thing I really wish there was? I had terrible postpartum anxiety and depression, like really badly. And at that time, that was pre-social media. And I think now there's a lot more support, not just information, but other people going through stuff that you had to go to like the library to read a book about. So that would have been a wonderful thing for me. And I see that, there's just a bigger open discussion about postpartum stuff. So not that part. What would I like to reclaim? Well, for me, the whole reason I'm sitting here, I realize, is because I had this very colicky baby, and I write about it in the beginning of the book. I had this extremely colicky baby he's 10 now, but he wouldn't sleep without the stroller moving. I was walking 15 miles a day. It was hell, but I see that it was those months, that was when I figured out what the fuck I was doing with my life. And I was like, I am not going back to a newsroom where I'm doing shifts. I need to, if I'm going to be away from my kids, I need it to be something where put good into the world. And how am I going to do this? And it took me a couple false starts, but it was about strategizing. And I needed the hours and miles and fatigue to get to that. It's kind of messed up, but like, I see moms on the street looking at their phones as they're pushing their stroller, and I feel sad for them because I'm like, I know it's hard, but like I did amazing work while I was doing nothing and pushing that stroller. So that's my one bit of nostalgia that I will indulge. I do really try not to be nostalgic though, because it's not productive, I think.
Right. Yeah. For me, actually, it's the lack of anxiety that there is always something
Yes.
waiting for you. There is always more to be read on the internet or somewhere else. There is always more to be researched about the topic. This vast amount of information waiting for us to be consumed is so bothersome in some way.
Or the other one that I have is like somebody's always waiting for you for something. You're always letting someone down because you haven't responded to them yet. That sucks.
Okay, more questions in the room?
We have a bunch in the room, but we're like 4 minutes out. So I'm going to ask one more question online, and then we'll have one wrap in the room. Online, it's and you've touched on this. So you've touched on a bunch of stuff that the questions are. So you've touched a bit on it, but around the idea for teens. The question is that there's been an effort to debunk the idea that phone addiction is the real problem for anxious or depressed teens, that rather it's just the quote state of the world, climate change, politics, etc. And as a parent of a teen who loves his phone, I find this troubling. So how can we keep pushing this conversation forward while not sounding alarmist?
I mean, if there's any time in my life that I felt the need to sound the alarm, it's now. So the premise of the question I take issue with, no, ring the bell is what I'm saying. I think it's okay, I'm sorry, hi. I think sounding alarmist with your child they're just obviously going to push against that. But that's why it's not just the responsibility of parents, it's the responsibility of educators. First and foremost, are your child's teachers talking to them about this stuff? If they're not, give her a copy of my book because it's a great conversation starter, and I am happy to be thrown under the bus for the teacher to use the work in the book to start a conversation. I think it's really important. Friday I sat in on this conversation with 8th graders, and they are so sharp and so aware and so wanting to talk about this stuff. They really do. And also, if we are going to find solutions to big problems like climate change, we need to give kids the capacity to do that hard problem solving and creative thinking and all of those things. And so I think we have to connect all the dots for them. And if that's not sounding the alarm, it is. It's urgent.
Okay, so time for one final question.
Yeah, we do have a final question, and it is very related to Mozilla. So it's appropriate. The question is do you have suggestions on how we at Mozilla might incorporate some of your thinking into the design of our products, like Firefox or Pocket, for example?
Oh yeah, you guys own Pocket. Oh my God, I love Pocket so. I love Pocket.
Yeah.
Oh, I love Pocket so much. And Firefox. Sorry, didn't mean to play favorites. Well, first of all, you guys are doing like the fact that it's woven into every time I log into the browser, it says something about this is great. Whether it's a shout out to your podcast, which is super cool that you guys are doing that there's the digital privacy features that you have as well. So I think just weaving it into your content sort of like, and also like it's nice graphics and it's kind of cheeky funny and like all of that really matters, I think, for people. I mean, can I take that as an invitation to sit down with this person? Because that's my fantasy, is like not just talking about it, but working to build stuff that then we get my listeners and your fans to test and tell us what is working, what is making change in their lives, and then iterating on that. That's my fantasy. So if you can make my fantasies come true, I'm in. I think that's the next step. I think that is the next step. We take the narratives, we test it with the people who get it, we find the narratives that get more people to get it, and we build the things that actually make the change. That's where I want to go.
Yeah, that's a wrap. So thank you so much
Oh,
again.
thanks you
Manoush.
guys.
This
Thank you
was
so
a
much for
delight.
having me. I'm going to stick around if you want to hang
Yes,
out.
please stay around. There are books. Manoush is still happy to talk to us for another 20 minutes or so. So thank you all for coming over, and thank you, Manoush. That was
Oh, it was
great.
so fun. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.